Hello and welcome to episode 307 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week, Toyota and Honda concede what we've been yelling at them for 6 years and 307 episodes. They're going to go bankrupt if they don't compete with Chinese EVs. That seemed to have dropped my mic.
This summer, households in the UK will be encouraged to use more electricity when there's lots of solar and wind power on the grid. Suggestions include charging your electric car, running the dishwasher, and turning your hi-fi system up to 11.
Ooh, OnlyFans creators are peddling climate change facts while reducing their clothing on camera. The facts are basically what we talk about on the show, with people paying much, much more attention than they do to us. Long story short, Brian, I have us scheduled for full body waxes on Friday.
Oh my. Shipbuilder Meyer Werft has announced a concept for an electric cruise ship they say could launch in 2031. The only catch on this luxury cruise ship? Fitness center time is mandatory because the exercise bikes are all hooked up to a generator.
All that and more on this edition of The Clean Energy Show. And also, on this week's show, Waymo is preparing to apply to operate in Canada for the first time. Snow be damned. And wind turbines may not be killing birds, as is widely assumed in the past, due to a couple new studies. And we'll have your letters after the lightning round this week.
Yeah, so I have an update on my cottage build that we haven't talked about for quite a long time.
I've been waiting.
Yeah, so I have a cottage property, and it's very old, and it's an old seasonal cottage, so the plan was always to tear it down and build something new. Well, we're going to go ahead. We're making a rammed earth cottage. And the build it's going to go ahead this summer.
Tell me what's going to happen. What's the timeline?
Well, hopefully to have a roof on the structure by the fall. That's the timeline.
Well, back up a bit, sir. When are you demolishing the old property? Not that it would take much. I could do it with a hammer.
Exactly. There's these concrete blocks on one corner that really look like they're about to give way and the whole thing is going to fall over.
Good Lord.
Yeah, demolition should happen a couple of weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, something like that.
And what would that look like? Do you know? Or did you just have it done?
We have somebody who's in charge of all this. Typically they use a backhoe, I think, and they just knock everything down with a backhoe.
Throw it into bins and take it away?
Yes, there is an issue about the garbage because certain places have certain rules about what kind of garbage you can put in certain places. So that has to be figured out. But, I don't think it's too big a job. And then, then we put in a septic tank and a cistern. And then piles. The cottage is going to be built on large concrete piles that have to go deep into the earth. So, hopefully that'll be happening in a couple of months.
Okay. So who's in charge of this? Like, is it the contract or the architect hired somebody, or is he ultimately the executive producer of this project?
Yes, the architect is kind of in charge of everything because it's rammed earth. I mean, not everybody can build a rammed earth structure.
Right.
And, this is his first.
He's found people to do it. This is a tricky thing because rammed earth things are not made around here. Is there examples in this whole province, this whole vast province?
Yes, there's 2 or 3 rammed earth structures in this province. So it has been done. It can be done.
But these are one-off projects. You're not gaining experience and then moving on to the next one, right? There has been a cluster of these.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if this is successful, our architect can move on to doing more of them. I'm sure he would enjoy doing that. So,
okay, rammed earth was a big thing 20 years ago. Everyone was saying, environment, climate change, we should be making our houses passive solar, which I assume this will be ultimately. I think we better explain what rammed earth is, because I think maybe 90% of our listeners don't know what that is.
Yeah, well, you can go down a rabbit hole on YouTube, and that's what I did because I hadn't heard of it until the architect mentioned it. But essentially you take dirt with like maybe a little bit of sand, maybe a little bit of cement powder and a little bit of moisture, and you put it into a form like you build a wood form that similar to what you would use for concrete, and you pour this mixture in there, and you sometimes put a little bit of color in it to add some color to it, and then you just pound it down with usually like a pneumatic pounder of some kind, and you do this kind of layer by layer. And so
is it vibration like when they settle concrete, or is it pounding? Is actual pounding?
Well, more like pounding, yeah.
Okay.
And so you do it a few inches at a time. And so we're hoping to have the walls. It should take about 5 months or less to do the walls. So it's a lengthy process. So is there
moisture? It's kind of soil mixed with concrete powder.
Yeah. Yeah.
And does it just harden naturally, or do you actually have to have a certain moisture content in it?
Yes, there is a certain moisture content, and all this has to be tested as well. So you kind of come up with a formula because dirt you get from one place is going to be different than dirt you get
Where's
from
it
another
getting
place.
the dirt from? Is it getting it locally? We're out where your cottage is? It's a couple hours away from where we live.
Yeah, hopefully close to the cottage, but that remains to be seen. But yeah, you do a test first where you do a test pressing, as it were, on a small wall section, and then you bore a hole out of that and you send it somewhere to get structure tested. And if you do it right, like these structures can last for hundreds of years.
So you're replacing your parents' cottage that they had made when everybody was making modest little cottages.
Yeah.
Back in the 50s, is that right? Somewhere in the 50s?
Yeah, it was built in the late 50s with some upgrades in the 60s.
Okay. So it was pretty modest. It had been out there for a couple of years during COVID, which was really nice. It's a beautiful, it's a lakefront property, which is great.
Yeah.
The people on either sides of you have built $1 million-ish mansions. Like they're quite big and nice. And one of them, at least one of them is living out there year round, right?
Yeah.
Whereas yours was not a year-round cottage, really. I mean, it was not insulated very well. It did have a propane furnace that your parents used.
Yeah, which, didn't work that great. My dad paid $25 for that furnace 50 years ago.
Used, I take it.
Yeah, it was used. But yeah, one by one, I mean, the property is too valuable to really just have a seasonal cottage on it. So one by one, all the lakefront cottages
So it is in a
upgraded.
provincial park here, so you had to get permission from them? I mean, this is a whole complicated thing. I have many questions, as you can tell.
Yeah, it wasn't that bad. Like, we submitted our original plans, and they came back, and this was only a couple of months ago. It took us a long time to get the engineer, like an engineer had to sign off on the plans and everything. So you submit to the park, and they looked at it and they identified a couple of things that they weren't happy with. So they sent the plans back to us. So we made like 2 quick changes and then they approved it.
So it's very sustainable because you're using earth mostly and some concrete, which is not sustainable right now.
Yeah.
It's well insulated because of that.
Yeah.
And it also retains heat from, like a summer day and disperses it slowly. I'm assuming it's a 1-story?
Yeah, it's a bungalow, and then there's a garage at the back that's going to have a living space above it. And the garage is actually going to be conventional construction. It's sort of going to be a separate building.
Right.
And that will not likely be built until the following summer. So we're going to concentrate on the rammed earth portion this summer and hopefully get a roof on it.
Will it be a conventional construction for the garage and guest suite? It will be conventional. Yeah. Okay. So it's all about this. So it's a bit, aren't you a little nervous because it's not done very often. I mean, people were building, straw bale homes out of bales of that. There was risks involved with that.
I'm a big fan of architecture, and that's the main reason I'm going ahead. And I made a short film about Joseph Pettick, a famous local architect here where we live. That's on YouTube if you want to look for it. It's called The Man Who Built My Childhood. And I interviewed him. He passed away a few years ago, but he built buildings through the 60s and 70s and 80s. And, I was asking him about those early days because he built some really audacious projects early in his career, 1959, 1960. And I said, well, how did you get that done? Like these are weird buildings. These are weird projects.
Yeah.
And he said, well, things were different back then for architects. People listened to us. And so that's been my mantra from the beginning. Listen to the architects. The architects have interesting things they want to do. And that's how you end up with interesting buildings.
Well, they're artists, and you need to just sort of let them, you can't give them too many notes. You're going to have certain needs, so certain requirements. How much square footage are we talking about here?
It's about 1,500 square feet.
Well, that's pretty big.
Yeah.
For a 1-story on that property. Is it going to be deep, like between the lakefront and the back?
Yeah.
Is that where you're not going to expand laterally to the neighbor's direction much?
No, exactly. It's more like a strip that's going to go in the middle of the lot.
When did you first talk to the architect, period? When did you first approach him about a cottage?
Wow. The first conversation was probably 5 years ago.
Right. And when did rammed earth come up? I didn't know it was his idea for rammed earth. I assumed because you're an environmentalist, it would be your idea, but it was his idea.
No, it was his idea. He's interested in those interesting things. He's interested in sustainable things. And so, I had to learn about it. I went on YouTube. There's one like David Suzuki and Randy Bachman. That's a famous one on YouTube. Randy Bachman, the famous rock star from the Guess Who and Bachman Turner Overdrive, he has a famous rammed earth house in the west coast of Canada. So, that's a good video that gives you a little introduction. So, yeah, I was sold right from going down that rabbit hole. It seems like it's a great kind of building to live in. Like they're very livable
aesthetic.
buildings.
It's very natural inside.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily feel, and it's great for a cottage on a lake because you want to be in nature, and this sort of, keeps you there without isolating you necessarily from the aesthetic of nature and the feeling.
Yeah. And it has the stability of something like concrete because they're very thick walls like rock, kind of.
Yeah.
But they're more organic. They're more breathable. So the wall can kind of absorb moisture and then release moisture. It's a bit more of a living thing than, concrete, which is really just, a hunk.
Well, I hope that you will make some trips out there during the construction process just to have a look, even though you're not going to have anywhere to stay.
Yeah.
Maybe overnight in a hotel somewhere, maybe.
Yeah.
Just take some pictures and maybe a short video clip for our Patreon page, because I'm sure our listeners would be very interested in everything that's going on. Whether you know about rammed earth or not, but I was very interested in about 20, 25 years ago, and I thought, well, I'm never going to get a house like that. I can't renovate a house in Regina. I could have mine burned down and rebuild it as rammed earth or something, but who would I get? And, it would add to the expense and everything. But it's interesting because, your cottage, I was out there during some heat waves, and it gets very hot during the day. It can get very hot. So and you're going to have a heat pump to cool it and heat it. So that doesn't matter. But I think just alone the rammed earth aspect of it. Will it have a concrete floor?
Yes, it'll be a concrete pad that it's put on. Yeah.
Will it be heated in the floor or elsewhere?
Yeah, that's the plan, to run piping through the floor and have
nice.
indoor heating. Yeah, that's the most comfortable way to go, I think.
And it's also the best way to store the heat too, is in the concrete slab.
Yeah, because then the concrete slab becomes thermal mass along with the walls. So, on a sunny day in the winter, all of that mass absorbs a bunch of heat and, holds the heat.
So even if it's a time when you don't have the air conditioning on, you open the windows, you get a nice draft through, it cools the house down, cools the concrete down, and that sort of still stays throughout the day or much of the day, and that's it's a thermal mass that helps regulate the temperature.
Yeah, because in a seasonal cottage like we had with basically no insulation, like as soon as it gets warm out, it immediately heats up inside the cabin and immediately becomes too hot. So, insulation helps you both in the summer and in the winter.
Is there backup heat for the heat pump?
Well, there'll need to be some kind of electric backup, but we haven't figured that out yet.
So if you're not there, you just need to keep the pipes from freezing, basically.
Yes.
But that would probably only be in very cold weather, so you'd have to make sure that you had enough electric heat to keep it a few degrees above freezing level.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's the plan. We'll have to work that out.
Have you figured out how to hang pictures on the wall? Because that confuses me.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know. Because yes, the idea is there's no drywall on the inside walls. The rammed earth is the finished wall on the inside and the outside, which is great because it's low maintenance. But yeah, in terms of hanging pictures, I wouldn't want to bang a nail into that.
There's got to be a way to do. I know there's a way to do it. I looked it up once.
Well, maybe hang from the ceiling or something, like you can.
Sure, you could do that.
Hooks at the top of the wall, something like that.
Anyway, okay. Well, it's very interesting. You'll keep us up to date on that. Are you going to miss anything from the cottage? Is it a sentimental event when the thing gets torn down, or is it a good riddance type of thing?
I'm not a sentimental type. To me, I'm into creating new traditions. So yes, people tend to hang on to traditions, but I'm into starting new traditions.
So I went to see my brother. I told you a couple of weeks ago for the first time in a while. He's hanging on to a car he bought in 1995 for sentimental reasons. It's in his driveway, driving the neighbors crazy. It's a Geo Metro beige. It did not have a radio because he requested it not have a radio lest it might get stolen. So they had to get a special from probably the first one ever not to have a radio. I can't imagine. I mean, there's probably a couple of my brothers around, but he paid for it in cash. I think it was $10,000 or something. Walked in there with cash because he doesn't do credit, which kicked him in the butt when it came time to take over my mother's house when she passed away.
Oh, no doubt.
Because he didn't have a credit rating at all. Not even a credit card or a checking account, nothing like that. So. But that's another story. Brian, we're recording this on Tuesday. And as we always do, our Patreon listeners get it Tuesday afternoon, and we come out on Wednesday everywhere else. Gas excise tax in Canada of 10 cents a litre has been cut. So next week, the government of Canada is making it cheaper for people to drive gas, which is the opposite of the carbon pricing, which put a price on pollution. Yes. They are taking it off now. This goes, I don't know what it goes to nationally, but it's kind of like a road tax. And I think it's only like 4 cents a litre for diesel, so it's less of it. It's, we're paying, the average in Canada is like $1.73 a litre nationally on average. And if you're in the United States, as most of you are, that's $6.55 per US gallon. And that's a lot. So it's taking a small portion off of that. But in the United States, it's only $1.15 a litre on average right now. I looked it up.
Yeah, converting.
And this is going to dethrone Trump, $1.15 a litre? You people have no idea what you're dealing with. I'm surprised anyone's going electric in the States. Of course, it varies widely by state. Like California's, as much as $8 in San Francisco. We had the other week. I also wanted to talk about in 2023, I noticed people posting graphs of how great solar is. And I noticed that in 2023, the graph goes straight up. Like it's the start of an S-curve, yes, but then it goes straight up, like almost completely vertical.
Yes. When an S-curve goes like that, I believe it's called a hockey stick.
Right. And so it starts going up very slowly at first from 2000, 2005, ticks up in 2010, starts going up a bit in 2015, hits 2020, starts going up pretty much like you would expect on an S-curve, but then 23, it goes straight up. And the reason why is because, the pandemic threw a monkey wrench into a number of things. The petrol prices went up. Energy prices went up. Conventional energy, which is the polite way of calling polluting energy, went up. Overcapacity and mass manufacturing expansion in China led to a glut of solar components, cutting module spot prices by 50% between December 2022 and December 2023, which is a lot in 1 year. And I think we might be facing a similar situation with other forms of energy right now because we have an energy spike in gas and LNG, natural gas, and now EVs are more common. So we might see the same thing now. The U.S. Inflation Reduction Act also helped the IRA that Biden had placed, and we covered on the show vigorously, acted as a major catalyst. But in Europe, high energy prices drove massive uptake of rooftop solar for energy security. Obviously, the war in Ukraine did a thing like that. So it was a tipping point happened when solar reached a stage where it was consistently the cheapest energy source, leading to widespread adoption, making it financially irresistible compared to fossil fuels. And that is happening in a lot of places of the world now, and that expanded a lot more. So will we see it this time? I think we'll see something. That was pretty extraordinary. But and also, there was still momentum from that. Like that momentum for 23 is still going.
Yeah.
Like even when prices for fossil fuels were down. So it had a lot of wind in its sails.
Yeah. And, solar energy obviously is not perfect because, it only works when there's sunlight. But the fact that it's the cheapest form of energy, that makes up for a lot of the downsides.
But I have a hot take, Brian. So here you go. With fossil fuel prices high in price now, and I think they might be for as much as a year or maybe the end of the calendar year. Who knows?
Yeah.
Minimum. Because there's a lot of demand that's been destroyed. A lot of refineries and storage is offline. So that's going to keep prices high for some time. And who knows what's going to happen in Iran. They're not going to fold over. They might. They might just get an agreement if Trump lets them not just have a small moratorium on nuclear building. But by the time it does, before this happened, we saw very weak oil prices. And part of that reason was because of EVs, electrified transportation. Even 2- and 3-wheel transportation is, a million and 1.5 million barrels per day, probably 2 million by now. And it was getting displaced. And what happened is the people with the cheapest oil and the most oil were saying, let's sell as much of it. So the Saudis, OPEC, were flooding the market a little bit. And they were also putting pressure on the North American fracking people to put them out of business, the small and medium players. It's a complicated thing that's above my pay grade. But we saw a lot of weakness in oil prices then. My take is that when the dust settles and the oil starts getting produced again, we're going to see a whole year of that electrification that has expanded throughout the world. And suddenly it's going to be even worse, and it's going to be a huge shock, particularly where you and I live, where we rely on oil revenue for our government. Like, we have to put money, they're going to not be able to, they can't do very well right now, but they had a big deficit this year.
Yeah.
Right? And Alberta, next door, big deficit, huge deficit. Their butts were saved by this Iran crisis. Like, they're going to now, look good by the end of the fiscal year. But I'm telling you, 1 year from now, those prices, if there's not further conflicts, and I don't know how there can be. I mean, China and Taiwan is certainly a big question. Did you see that the Chinese embassy in Washington is putting up barbed wire around their embassy, and people are wondering, why are they doing that? So that was kind of disturbing. Yeah. But yeah, I just think that we're going to see when the dust settles from this, all this is still going on in the background and even increasing because of the prices. So what's going to happen when the oil starts to flow again? I think those prices are going to be pretty cheap.
Yeah, well, many of the stories that we've been talking about lately, of course, are about just accelerating clean energy because of the oil shock that's going on right now. And in somewhat related news from The Guardian, UK homes this summer are expected to be asked to use more power. So this is the thing that happens when you get a little too much clean energy on the grid, because you get a sunny, windy day and boom, you might end up with more power on the grid. So they're expecting a lot of clean energy on the UK grid this summer. It has been surging lately. They hit 2 all-time highs recently on 2 consecutive days that were sunny and windy just a couple of weeks ago. And, guess what happens when solar and wind hits a peak like that? Well, they don't have to burn natural gas. So natural gas consumption dropped to a 2-year low because of those recent sunny, windy days. It's just wild that sun and wind can displace burning, polluting gas, but it definitely happens. So this summer, it's expected the UK is going to achieve 100% renewables on the grid for certain periods of time when those, sunny, windy days are happening. They're also expecting to be a net importer of electricity from Europe, which is expecting to have a lot of nuclear power and renewable energy this summer. So we covered on the show back in 2024, the UK phased out coal. After 142 years of coal power in the UK, they became the first G7 country to phase it out completely. So coal is gone. Their grid is now going to achieve 100% renewables for brief periods of time this summer. So they're going to work with, the different energy suppliers around the UK, and they're going to offer heavily discounted or possibly even free electricity to customers during specific periods when they know that the energy system is going to have a surplus of clean energy. There's already different rates paid. It really shows the importance of having a smart grid and having smart meters on everybody's houses so you can play with these things. If you don't have the option to, reduce the cost to zero, it really reduces what you can do with the grid. But yeah, this is the first time that they're going to be using those rates to really kind of balance out the grid this summer. Because, if you don't tackle it, having too much energy, there's worse problems. But if you're not able to use it, it can lead to blackouts.
Yeah. And I think that we talked about how places in the world not only are having more expensive energy, they're having a shortage of it, depending on where you are. I was looking at the shipping routes to Australia to get diesel there. Yeah. There's 3 ships coming from the port on Western Canada in Vancouver, carrying diesel all the way to Australia, which is a bit of a drive on the ocean. So, it's pretty extreme. And what happens, though, is that they'll have maybe a stockpile of natural gas, thanks to renewables, that they can have for next winter if there's a shortage or if the prices are high. And that will be very helpful to them. Also, I'm thinking they need more storage, obviously. Yep. If they have to worried about curtailing renewables, then they need more storage.
Yes, and more intergrid connections, which is something they're planning to work on and expand. If they just had more intergrid connections to other places farther away that do need power, eventually this stuff won't be a problem once they have more batteries and once they have more connections with different grids.
Right. Well, hopefully battery prices will come down and more people are putting solar on the roofs, more people can put batteries in their homes. Or better yet, if you already have an EV, if you're a driver, you can put your car to use and store some of that energy. But it's tough if you do drive to work.
Yeah.
Because then your car is not at home during the week.
Yeah.
It is on the weekends, but yeah. But actually, the weekends are where they have the most energy because the businesses and factories aren't working and they have even the most. So maybe you wait. In the summertime, you could probably charge your car once a week for free on like a Saturday afternoon or something. Or maybe you spread it over 2 days if you have a really big car. And then you're driving for free.
Yeah.
So, that's not all going to happen everywhere. It's a possibility, though. That's one way to do it. And people don't think about all the different possibilities that are going on. And speaking of possibilities, Brian, we started this podcast 6 years and a couple months, 3 months ago?
Yeah.
We've been talking a lot about things, and sometimes people think, our listeners, loyal as they may be, think we're crazy, think we're wrong about something, a little too enthusiastic. We talked about Honda and Toyota, not being laggards on EVs, and that's going to come and kick them in the butts by around 2030, we figured. Said that a lot. We had an email from a guy who worked in a Toyota factory. He says, no, we're getting a Toyota EV, which turned out to be the BZ4X, which is named in a way that they would want to sell a lot of them. The BZ4X. Yeah, people were jumping on that. And also, the wheels fell off 2 weeks in, so they had to recall it for wheels falling off due to poor lug nuts, not the tightness of the lug nuts, the poorness of the lug nuts. So they really were not putting their effort into those EVs. And we've been saying this for years, and nobody believed me. And I'm sure a lot of people still don't believe me, but the CEOs of those two companies said the exact same thing this week. They said those very things, because they finally went to China to have a look what was going on. Finally. Like, how could you run $1 billion company and do that? I'm just a guy with a podcast. I'm a simple man, mortal as I am. China's auto industry is moving insanely fast. Ford, Toyota, and Honda are all basically sounding the alarm finally. Toyota's Koji Sato says straight up, if Toyota doesn't transform, it won't survive. Dramatic pause. It won't survive. In other words, it will be taken over or go bankrupt.
Yeah, and I will say that they're still doing okay. Toyota is the world's largest automaker, and they are still making sales, and, they've started to drop a little bit. But, it's coming to get them.
This isn't just about EVs. If the whole world wanted hybrids, and I hope they don't because I think that's a mistake, even plug-in hybrids, they would still be overtaken by China because China is doing better manufacturing, more efficient manufacturing. They're overtaking everybody. Chinese automakers can go from an idea to production faster than anyone on Earth. I think it's like as little as a couple of years. We've seen examples of that. That's how BYD exploded in growth and is now going global. A lot of the automakers in China are going global because they need to sell as many cars as they can. They have the capacity to do so. The problem, the legacy automakers take about twice as long to launch new cars. So if that gets compounded over and over again, suddenly you're years and years behind overall. And meanwhile, Chinese EV companies can pump out new models in under 2 years, and they can do it much cheaper, of course. And Honda is already feeling it. Sales in China have been dropping for years. The CEO, Toshiro, I don't know how you pronounce his last name, Mibe, visited China. Apologies to listeners in Japan. Visited China and basically said, this is a quote, we can't compete with that speed. His takeaway, move faster and move now. So they've got a fire under their butts. The Ford CEO, we heard about him having a fire under his butt about a year ago and starting a program trying to they're not going to be able to do it. They're not China. You can't pull this out of your butt instantly and change the way you're doing things for decades.
And we've heard this kind of rhetoric from Ford and, Volkswagen. Volkswagen had a CEO that was hell-bent on electrifying Volkswagen, and he made some progress, and then he was ousted, and Volkswagen's in trouble. Ford is not doing great. They scaled back their EV plans after saying a couple of years ago that they needed to do it.
So the world's biggest automaker, the largest automaker, Toyota, love the quality, wish they had a whole fleet of EVs for James to choose from. I would be driving a Toyota and not a crappy Chevrolet Bolt. Is also shaken by China's speed. The company CEO Koji Sato described it as a crisis. He said, unless things change, we will not survive. I want everyone to acknowledge this sense of crisis. So they were shaken. I don't know why it took them so long to go to China or so long. They could have listened to our show. Brian, We could have saved them literally billions of dollars if they listened to the show. I would have taken a tiny piece of that wet my beak. That's all I would have needed. A tiny piece of $1 billion. I'd be okay. So we were mocked and spat on for saying this over and over. But, the Pope should meet with us.
Yeah.
The Pope should meet with us, and we should have a satellite office on Wall Street, I think, because we've got good business advice here that could have saved people billions of dollars.
No, that's a great idea. One thing I want to add is that, the Chinese companies have been moving so quickly that we weren't necessarily, a full 6 years ago, we were talking about electrification, but it wasn't obvious 6 years ago that the Chinese were going to lead. It happened a couple years after that, but, the need to electrify was very, very clear 6 years ago.
But what we did know, we knew the world was going to EVs. We knew EVs were better than combustion vehicles because we driven them, and I owned one at the time. We knew that, and it was completely obvious. And we knew that the trajectory for price, they would eventually have a sticker price less for a better car. And that's what's starting to happen now in different segments. So, and then, of course, the Chinese automakers weren't great in 2020, but they were starting to be around then.
Yeah.
And we were starting to get good reviews. And BYD has been on my radar for 20 years almost now. And, Warren Buffett invested in them in 2008, and then he got out because he knew that he was right. But BYD's stock has actually gone up during this oil crisis. So, but I think that's just speculative. I don't think that's necessarily a Warren Buffett level decision.
All right. So on to the next story. This is from Electrek. And I wasn't sure at first whether to talk about this or not, because I'm not crazy about talking about concept things that are kind of years in the future. I prefer to talk about things that are, happening now or happening by 2030. We sort of thought about this podcast when we started it in 2020 as something, imagine all the changes by 2030. So this is an electric cruise ship, and it sort of comes on the tail of the Viking Libra. And that's the main reason I wanted to talk about this, is that we talked previously about the world's first hydrogen-powered cruise ship, which is the Viking Libra, which is going to launch at the end of this year. Everything's on track for its official first cruise at the end of December. And at the time we reported on that, it's a big deal because as long as you're getting green hydrogen that's made with clean energy, this is a completely emissions-free cruise ship. And that's a big deal because cruise ships are quite polluting. It's like a small city that runs on diesel. It's never been great. But at the time when we talked about the hydrogen cruise ship, I sort of thought, well, okay, this must be the use case for hydrogen because we've more or less gotten past the fact of using hydrogen for passenger cars. Electric cars are just way more efficient and better. You just don't need hydrogen is an extra bother that you just don't need. But
tell that to Honda.
Yeah, to Honda, who may still be working on hydrogen cars for some reason. But it's like, okay, well, maybe that's the use case for hydrogen is cruise ships. And I assume that Viking did the math.
Or any ship, really. Any ship, really.
But I assumed at the time, well, they must have done the math and figured out, batteries aren't going to work for this. But guess what? Batteries should likely work. And so this company, Meyer Werft, this is a German shipyard that goes back to 1795. They've made 61 cruise ships over the years, and they're unveiling their concept next week called Vision. And this is a fully battery electric cruise ship that can hold 1,856 passengers. We don't have the full specs of this, but it suggests in the article that cruise routes in the Mediterranean would be a good use for this. Cruise ships often don't go that far. You, of course, do have ocean-going cruise ships, and they say in their press release that they may actually do a hybrid version. So you could have diesel backup and make this into an ocean-going cruise ship, but fully battery electric. It should do lots of European cruise routes without a problem. Although, like I say, they didn't release the specs for this, but they're going to unveil it next week. And if somebody wants to order one, they say they can build it and be ready by 2031.
Well, my bank account's a little tight right now to order a cruise ship, but it seems like a good idea.
Yeah.
Now, this isn't a Shanghai to London cargo run.
Yeah.
This is, like you say, sort of along the coastline. I think it was 550 miles.
Yeah.
They were talking about.
Yeah, they didn't say specific range, but, often cruise ships do shorter hops.
Okay. Well, let's say 10, 15 years from now, what are batteries technology prices and technology going to be? The volume of energy stored. If they're talking about it now, this is my thinking. If they're talking about it now for 2031, which is 5 years, that's nothing.
Yeah, that's nothing.
That's not a. It might be that's what they talk about with a prototype for a car. They might say earlier than 5 years, but it turns out to be 5 years. But a cruise ship, well, that's pretty major.
Yeah. And, obviously the batteries are going to be very, very large and very, very heavy and very expensive. But, diesel engines are very large and heavy. And they mentioned
require maintenance.
Noisier,
smellier.
Very much noisier. You'd get much less vibration with an electric cruise ship. Yeah. Plus, you have to have those giant smokestacks in the middle of the ship. So if you could do away with all of that diesel infrastructure, you're going to save a lot of weight and you're going to save a lot of space. And presumably that weight and that space can be replaced by batteries.
You know what? We talked about these hard form factor sails that they're talking about putting on ships that they're running tests.
Sort of.
You could replace the smokestacks with a couple of sails.
Energy harvesting sails, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, they don't do the whole thing, but they would reduce the energy use by a substantial amount. I can't remember the figure. It was 30-40% or something, potentially. So, yeah, they're all, electronic. You don't have a guy up there running it like a sailboat. They're all electronically controlled by computers based on the conditions. So that's very interesting. And I think it's a worthwhile story to talk about. Of course, they would have to put large charging things in many ports. I think they mentioned a lot, hundreds of ports would require charging.
Yes. No, there's a note in here to support this future of electric cruise ships. There's approximately 100 seaports across Europe that will be required to offer maritime charging infrastructure by 2030. So these are regulations that are, already in the works.
Well, you could sell the electricity to the ship and maybe mark it up a little bit if you're a port.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you can do that with diesel or other fuels that ships use, which is kind of the sludge leftovers from the refineries for most of the ocean. So that is interesting. And, maybe more ships will come on board because if they have an economic case for this, then look out because shipping is very competitive. And if you can reduce the cost of that shipping because of the fuel, well, and of course, we don't know if diesel could be given away by then if there's a glut in the market as well. We don't know that. So it's all complicated. All right, Brian, 2 recent studies have re-examined the risk of birds entering in collision with rotor blades on wind turbines. We have a lot. Even the President of the United States even says that wind turbines are killing eagles. The precious eagles, which I like eagles. I'm still watching them. The chicks are doing fine, by the way, even though there's a snowstorm. Knock on wood, Big Bear Lake, California, on YouTube live right now. But he claims that, and people were putting eagle carcasses below. They caught somebody doing that once. There's all kinds of weird stories trying to get this wind away from us, this woke energy. But the research of 2 studies found that there was not a single collision. This is in Aberdeen Bay. The results from Aberdeen Bay show that modern offshore wind farms, this is offshore wind farms, can be operated with low risk to wildlife. Now, I've got an aunt who sometimes I get in, she's 85 years old. She gets into discussions with me about clean energy sometimes. She's for it, but she's old school. She's from the silent generation. And she thinks that she's heard that, like everyone else, you hear something negative and it sticks. It sticks like glue. Positive things, not so much, or, the later contradictory evidence. So there's been, we talked about one place that did a study with painting one of the blades black. Yeah. And then that reduced bird collisions a lot. But I wondered, why is there so many bird collisions offshore? Because they're quite a ways offshore and birds can't just fly around. They need somewhere to land. Maybe they land on the wind turbine or maybe they go towards it because it seems like a landing place. I don't know what the issue is. But where they found over 19 months from June 2023 to December 2024 video recordings. They made custom video recordings of the wind turbine, and then they had AI sort of analyze those wind turbines for birds. And a total of 2,007 bird flight paths were near the monitored turbine and examined, but not one involved in a collision in this case. Yeah. So the long story short is it may be over-exaggerated, and that is from Euronews.com.
Yeah, and I remember when we talked about this previously with, eagles and hawks and stuff. One of the issues on land is they're often hunting. So they're looking down at the soil for mice or whatever.
Right.
And that might be why they run into something that they're not expecting. All right, you can contact us about anything. cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. You can leave us a voicemail at speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow.
And we will have your letters after the lightning round this week. The Clean Energy Show is powered by our listeners who support our work on Patreon. Please go to patreon.com/cleanenergypod and support this podcast for as little as $1 a month. $5 a month gets you into the Clean Club, where you'll get, ad-free, high-quality audio, early access before anyone else, and exclusive behind-the-scenes content, plus Discord benefits, discount on merch, and even a shout-out on the show once per month. That's patreon.com/cleanenergypod. And thanks to everyone for helping keep independent climate journalism alive. Coming up next, it's the lightning round. It's time for the lightning round.
The Lightning Round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
The mass drowning of emperor penguins. That's the good penguins, the penguins we all love, the cartoon penguins. Emperor penguins, chicks, as there's a mass drowning taking place as sea ice is melted by the climate crisis and has led the International Union for Conservation of Nature to declare the species officially in danger of extinction. That is not something you want to hear. And it's not only a problem, it's a warning sign of other things. For the Toronto Star, Waymo is preparing to apply to Ontario's, as a province in Canada, our biggest province. It's also our automotive manufacturing province, interestingly. It's also close to Detroit, interestingly. They are preparing to apply to Ontario's automated vehicle pilot program as it looks to bring its driverless robotaxi service to Toronto. Not as cold as us, not quite as snowy as us, as often as us maybe, but it can be quite snowy there. You've lived there. I've lived there a bit. And it's also kind of interesting that BYD would be opening their first stores in Ontario, in Toronto, because that is really kind of a statement to go right for the auto industry where it lives.
Yeah.
And also Detroit, which is quivering in their boots. And there's some people in the United States, even conservative people, who think that to hell with the conventional automakers here. We want more affordable vehicles, so why should we keep them out? Approval for Waymo would allow the company to test vehicles in Ontario and serve as a potential precursor to commercial robotaxi operations in Canada's largest city. However, both civic and provincial politicians are pushing back quite vigorously due to job losses that robotaxis would inevitably cause, although you could say that a lot of people who work to run the computers and monitor the taxis and charge the vehicles and yada, 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 clean the vehicles. I don't know. It's not going to be a one-for-one job change, though. And they did have this program in place for automation to test automated vehicles in Ontario. And Waymo is just applying for that thing that already existed, assumably, reportedly. New wind capacity globally surges 47% in 2025 compared to 2024. That's a big jump, Brian, because solar was only up 11% last year globally. So wind, we talked about solar taking off. Well, wind is making a comeback in spite of the administration south of our border in the United States, which is pushing against wind hard. Microsoft bought 90% of all carbon removal credits sold last year, which is interesting, and I'll say why in a second. In fact, they may have even bought 80% of all carbon removal ever sold. Ever. But now they're pausing future purchases, except this one. And where is this one? It's where Brian and I live, in our province. Microsoft has signed Canada's first Indigenous-owned bioenergy with carbon capture and storage deal. This is a 626,000 tons of carbon removal credits over 15 years in partnership between Meadow Lake Tribal Council and other partners. The Meadow Lake Tribal Council began when the First Nations of Northwest Saskatchewan, that's our province here, united a couple decades ago or so, 3 decades ago, I guess. The existing MLTC Bioenergy Center is a forestry biomass cogeneration facility. The facility generates renewable electricity and heat by burning sustainable waste biomass. So when they clean out the forests, I think, when we received our recognition award almost a year ago that there was somebody involved in that there. So kind of interesting stuff going on up there. And apparently Microsoft is getting out of it, but it's also doing that. So it's kind of interesting. This is a CS fast fact. Over 50% of the total rail network in Russia is electrified. I found that a surprise. You?
Yeah. I mean, more rail, across the pond is certainly electrified than what we have here in North America.
I don't consider Russia across the pond. I consider it a different planet, especially now, these days. Electric trains carry the vast majority of traffic, around 85 to 87% of all passenger journeys and freight tonnage. Russian Railways has electrified over 43,000 kilometers of its 85,000 kilometer plus network. Russia is one of the largest electrified networks in the world by total kilometers. So I'm surprised, a little surprised. North, cold. Siberia, cold. Long distances like Canada, but they're doing it. And also a petro state like Canada. The continental United States registered its most abnormally hot month in 132 years of records. Congratulations, according to NOAA data. So NOAA data. Yeah, that's March. Hottest month in 130 ever, and as long as they've been keeping records. So Ember Energy says India has the ground-mounted solar capacity of 3.3 terawatts, or 20 times what they currently have installed. Then there's more room for solar on rooftops and balconies as well, so the ground-mounted availability to put solar panels is 20 times what they currently have installed, which is a lot of energy available for. No shortage of space in India to electrify or to decarbonize with solar. Tesla gets FSD supervised approval in the Netherlands. Netherlands, big country for electrification, so they are going to have supervised, full self-driving beta. This is software that can drive you from point A to point B, whether it's city or country. Used Tesla prices are now up 15% in the United States due to the spike in gas prices. Maybe it's a good time for me to unload my Bolt.
Yep. Yeah.
Consumers of NextEra Energy, one of the world's largest solar and battery developers, they saved more than $1.1 billion in fuel costs between 2027 and 2024. During the same time, the cost of gas-fired power generation tripled in the United States. That's the new gas-fired power generation. To build new gas-fired power generation, 3 times. So basically what they're saying is natural gas ain't cheap and clean, which they've been going around saying. No longer the case because of AI, data centers, and such buying up all the turbines for natural gas.
Yes.
India added around 44.6 gigawatts of solar, speaking of solar in India, and 6 gigawatts of wind capacity in fiscal year 2026. That sounds weird because we just started 2026. Well, the way they do it, when they end the fiscal year early in March. So it's ending now, and that fiscal is what the fiscal year is. So solar and wind installations increased by 87.2% and 45.6%. That's an S-curve for you. If they put that on a graph, that would be going straight up. Thank you very much. Good for India. For the first time ever, heat pumps outsold gas boilers in Germany in 2025. 48% of all new heating systems installed last year were heat pumps. That is a reverse air conditioner, which transfers heat from outdoors to indoors efficiently, much more efficiently than using electricity just to generate that heat by itself. Gas fell to just 39%. A decade ago, heat pumps had just a 7% market share there. And now, taking off.
Moving quick.
Dutch government tests hydrogen ship for maritime operations. A pilot project will retrofit an existing vessel to run on hydrogen fuel cells. The goal is to reduce risk, so they're testing the risk of storing that hydrogen on that ship to not Hindenburg themselves and gather real-world data before a wider rollout. And sadly, smoke from Canada's 2023 wildfires linked to more than 80,000 early deaths worldwide, including more than 22,000 in Europe. Now, we had a listener in Switzerland send us photos of our smoke from our province in Canada, going all the way over there and other places, but mostly from around here in that area, all the way to Europe. And that's pretty sad. Pretty sad stuff there. I mean, it makes my life stink. I don't care for breathing smoke all the time. But 80,000 early deaths worldwide, From us?
Yeah.
That's nuts.
We like exporting our podcast to Europe. We don't like exporting our wildfire smoke.
Yeah. I mean, the world's going to burn more and more. And we're saying that we're ready for the wildfires now. We're going to be on top of them. That's what the government is saying. I don't know that they can be. I don't know that they are. I'm hoping for a better environmental factors this year so we don't burn up, but who knows what can happen. We're also expecting an El Nino year where it's going to be hotter than normal in the Northern Hemisphere in a lot of places. So again, with the IEEFA, based on current capital costs for new gas-fired power plants, Lazard estimates that power prices from these plants would be $107 per megawatt hour. And at these elevated capital levels, combined cycle gas plants, which are the most common, are no longer a low-cost electricity source. Yeah, so that's where solar and wind takes off even more. And finally, this week in the lightning round, Headline Nudes is a new web video series by Adam McKay's Yellow Dot Studios. That's the guy who made Don't Look Up and The Big Short, both films likely hated by Brian Stockton. I know the Don't Look Up was. I can't remember The Big Short.
No, I enjoyed The Big Short. I didn't like the other one.
Oh, finally. Finally a film that Brian likes. The series features short videos where the OnlyFans creators, OnlyFans is, if you don't know, it's kind of like a gig work for people who create their own erotica or pornography. Yeah. Don't personally have an account yet, but I'll explain why we might be getting one. So the OnlyFans creators explained the climate crisis in bold, attention-grabbing ways. Now, I seen a report of their videos of what they're talking about. It's the same damn thing we talk about. The exact same messages that we have on the show here, but it's not registering with enough people, so they have models take off their clothes or, do weird things. That is to say, there's just not a lot of clothes involved by the end of these videos. So what? Is this what we have to do to communicate the climate crisis? I don't know. The first video is called The Sun is Daddy. I'm too old to know what that means. The actor slowly removes her clothes while explaining that solar energy could meet our global energy demands with less land that is being used by the fossil fuel industry. Said on this show many times, but with clothes. We're doing it wrong. Maybe AI can just make me naked. We'll just have an OnlyFans version of the podcast in a flattering way. Her words were, Daddy is a giver. Still, too old to know what that means, quite. Is that the world? The world is daddy? I don't know. But he sure is. The Guardian says provocation is the driving factor here. And indeed, the Yellow Dot website makes it clear that it fully expects its uploads to be Instagram and YouTube to be removed on content grounds. And yet they're uploading them anyway, but it's creating press.
Yeah.
We're talking about it. We don't, it doesn't do them any good for us to talk about it because that's all we talk about on the show. But the videos will also be available on OnlyFans, where I'm sure they will not be taken down. So I guess we'll start building our OnlyFans channel this weekend.
All right. Well, let's move on to the mailbag. So first letter here. Hi, James and Brian, regarding charging at hotels. The last time I was at a hotel, they didn't have any chargers free or paid. They did have a large parking lot with lots of lights. I was thinking that if they put 1 or 2 120-volt outlets on those posts, they could allow their guests to do a trickle charge using them with a mobile charger. I've used my mobile charger that plugs into 120 volts at cottages we rented when we drove our EV out to PEI from Ottawa, Ontario, twice. It takes a long time to charge. However, we found it was enough time to do the driving around on the island that we wanted. Parks Canada also has had free chargers in some of their parking lots, which also helps. Parks Canada, at least in PEI, also had lots of electric vehicles. That letter is from Richard. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a great point. It is fairly easy to take power out of a lamppost, and we have covered stories like that in the past. Easier to do in Europe, where their native voltage is 240, and you can get a really good charge out of a lamppost charger.
I don't know what they are in North America. Are they a different voltage? Do they? Because I honestly don't know. That's a tricky. If somebody knows that answer, give us an email. Or a comment on our Patreon page.
It would likely just give you 120-volt charging. But of course, here in Western Canada, we have lots of block heater plug-ins. And I have used those at hotels before. But it's a very slow charge. And, you're only going to get a few miles every night.
Now, a lot of places that have those block heater chargers, and if you don't know what that is, welcome to coldness, because it plugs a little heater into your engine block on your gas vehicle so that the oil doesn't get too dense and thick, and so it's lubricant enough to move to turn over the engine to start your car. And it's kind of unnecessary, although you do have to heat batteries in electric cars currently. With new battery technology, maybe not, but right now we kind of keep them heated to minus 17. So my take on this is that hotels should have 240 volt charging.
Yeah.
I would not appreciate so much, because you get about, say I'm on a summer vacation, I would get about 7 kilometers in a car, sedan, a hatchback, whatever, not too big of a vehicle, but 7 kilometers per hour. So if I checked into a hotel, I might have 14 hours of charging, which would be nice. It would be that much less charging that I would have to do elsewhere. But it's hardly, I like, it's a big deal to wake up with a full tank in the morning at a hotel and start your journey. It's a big deal. It's a big plus. So I would say that maybe there's a way that they can upgrade those poles if they weren't 240 volts in North America, which is kind of not standard unless it isn't home. So why wouldn't it be in the grid? I don't know. We'll see. I'll have to look that up. So that's my take, that I probably wouldn't even do that. I would at a cottage, though, as you say, Richard. I would definitely do that. I would, if I had a vacation property somewhere or a bed and breakfast or a rented house, I would probably, that would be great, because you're there for a couple of days and you would, at least a couple of days, you would probably charge up and then you go driving around, plug back in again. That adds up. But overnight at a hotel, not as much. And I think that they could put more chargers in the hotels if they shared the electricity. This is the same story with condos. If they use smart technology to sort of share. So if 4 people plug into 4 hotel chargers and they can only output so much wattage, well, if you gave 2 kilowatts each, that would be almost enough to fill them up all overnight. One fills up and the others go up in wattage and output more. So that's a possibility of sharing a group of chargers. And I think that's the future, definitely the future. Here's another letter. This is from Ian. He says, "Hey guys, love the podcast. You mentioned on the last one that people in the United Kingdom could protect themselves from current high energy prices by going electric. Not so, from what I understand from watching Everything Electric. It seems that the system is rigged in the UK by electricity prices being based on methane, that's natural gas prices. They base the electricity prices based on what natural gas are, even though a big chunk is wind generated. Ouch," he says. Cheers, Ian. Yeah, so I looked at the price. The average price of electricity in the United Kingdom is 24.67 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's pricey. Yeah. That's pricier than where we are. That's about 50% more than where we are. It's not California level. It's not some other expensive levels. And it's not Calgary, which we talked about last week, which was 8 cents. So the UK electricity prices are heavily influenced by natural gas prices because the gas-fired power stations often act as the marginal or last resort source of electricity to meet demand, so they price it on that. Under the UK's wholesale market structure, the most expensive source needed to meet demand sets the price for all electricity generated, meaning high gas costs inflate the price of cheaper renewables. However, more than 2 million people, more than 2 million households have the opportunity to pay lower rates for electricity used during off-peak hours. And this will grow as they roll out smart meters in the United Kingdom and everywhere else in the world. And you can charge your car at night, sometimes for a fraction, sometimes a tiny fraction of what it costs during most other hours.
Yes, and hopefully cheaper powers during sunny, windy days, as we talked about earlier. All right, next letter. Good afternoon, fellas. I really appreciated your focus in the last episode on the foolishness of the coal refurbishment project here in Saskatchewan. It is madness. Please consider making your comments known to the Saskatchewan Rate Review Panel with a public submission from each of you and as many listeners as possible, and we'll put the link in our show notes. Of course, most of our listeners aren't from here, but anybody who is from around here, from Saskatchewan, you can go to that and leave a comment. So the letter continues. It's great that you create awareness on your show, but I think encouraging your listeners to take important action via the public feedback channel above is important. On another note, one of our 2 climate litigation actions will be back in court in Regina on April 17th at 10 a.m. I anticipate that there may be folks demonstrating outside the courthouse from 11 to 1 or so. I will be in the courtroom making submission, urging the court to allow our appeals so that we can proceed to a hearing on merits. A press release from our client, Climate Justice Saskatoon, can be found on their website, climatejusticesaskatoon.ca. James will put that on the Patreon page. Thanks for the great work on the show. That is from Glenn. Glenn is doing amazing work trying to fight the foolishness of coal in court here.
Yeah, and I'm itching to get to a climate court hearing, and I've never sat on any. I've been on a jury selection once, which was for a murder, I think.
Sure.
I didn't get selected. I had finals in university. I got out in that for that reason, thankfully. But and people sometimes they have PTSD from going through trials like that. But hopefully not this one, Glenn. Hopefully that is unpleasant as it may be. I would love to be in court. I'm not healthy enough to demonstrate. I've determined that. Not yet, but I will one day, hopefully, after my operation and a year of recovery. And maybe we can meet up sometime as well. So that's great. Thank you for your work, Glenn. And check our Patreon page for the, because for that press release, but our province fighting coal, wanting to have coal. And it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. No, and as we reported last week, they just spend $313 million a year just on buying the coal, on mining the coal, and all the clean energy you could build for that. It's insane. All right, you can find us on social media like TikTok, Instagram, and Blue Sky. We're Clean Energy Pod. That Patreon is patreon.com/cleanenergypod. Email cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. And as always, remember to hit that follow or subscribe button, and new episodes every week.
And a shout out to our most generous Patreon members in the Clean Club Executive Branch, Green Bastard, Brent Routley, and Tiernan. Thank you all for supporting the podcast. We'll see you again in 7 days.
See you next week.